Welcome to Rustler's Reminiscence, stories of hope, faith, and frontier courage. Let the journey unfold. I'm Clara McBride, and the first thing Sundown Ridge taught me was how a town listens with its teeth. The coach set me down like a sack of oats no one wanted, and the wind took my hat clean off, skittering it into a thorn bush. I should have chased it. Instead, I froze at the sound of two voices low, close, and sharpened by the dawn. They stood by the hitch rail, boots cocked against a wheel. Found a body in the creek, one said. Face tore up, could be her. Her. It hit like a thrown horseshoe. I kept my chin tucked, gathered my carpetbag, and told my trembling legs to move. The stranger hired to claim me as his wife, John Avery, farmer and widower, waited with the cool look of a man who didn't believe in surprises. He took my hand for form's sake and led me past the mercantile, past the church with sun already blanching the cross, past mouths that half smiled and didn't. I had a name before Clara. I burned it 6 years back in a stove that hissed like a snake. There'd been a night and a man in a room where the shutters wouldn't quit, and after there'd been blood, not all of it mine. I left the shawl, the hair ribbons, and the girl I'd been between 2 counties and never looked back. A mail-order bride pays for safety with her own quiet. I intended to keep mine locked. John's house sat on a rise where sand met dead grass. He showed me the well, the hogs, the narrow bed. He didn't touch me. He didn't smile either, only sighed, "Work's honest, if you are," and left me to a kitchen that smelled like old coffee and lard. I washed my hands and stared at the warped face in the tin mirror over the basin. The whispers followed through the slats. By noon, the rumor had fattened. The body was a woman. The body had a ribbon. The body had my hair color. Folks said I'd lived under another name back south, that I was running from a thing with knuckles. A woman in a calico dress asked if I liked to sleep with windows open, and when I told her yes, she smiled like she'd counted my teeth. I shut the windows and barred the door with a chair. Panic spat through my chest in little bursts, same as it had the last time a town started pronouncing my life before I could. I sat on the floorboards and pressed my back to the door until my breathing slowed. I told myself I could leave. I told myself I could throw the ring John had given me into the oats bin and walk out between the mesquite and never answer to Clara or any other ghost. But another voice, thin, stubborn, said I had walked too far to keep running. If the creek had a woman in it, I needed to know whose bones the town wanted to hang my name on at dusk. When the air turned to copper, I unbarred the door. The street outside wore the quiet smile of a gambler hiding aces. I stepped into it anyway. I would find the whisper's mouth before it swallowed mine. The saloon was a dim throat of smoke and brass. I went because fear drives you to light, even if the light smells like whiskey and old sweat. Card sharps crowded a corner table, breath held for luck. A piano bled a hymn that didn't belong there. I stood a beat too long in the doorway and let the room lay its eyes on me. The bartender was a stump of a man with hands like root knots and a beard salted in pipe ash. He watched me and poured water into a chipped mug. When I took it, a folded paper kissed my palm. I didn't look down. I let the paper sit like a hot coin until I found a shadowed table near the stove. Then I opened it under my shawl. They know. Meet me behind the granary. 3 words and a direction, and the floor tilted. Under me. I tried to swallow and only managed to taste iron. Who was they, and how much did the bartender sell for? My pulse argued to fetch John and pretend married women didn't meet secrets in alleys. The rest of me a place past pride, past fatigue settled. As sure as a bullet in a chamber. I slid the note into my sleeve and finished the water slow. Men talked. They talked about cattle prices, a new deputy, a church picnic that ended with two boys fighting over a pie. But under it was a different talk, that heated hush that means names are traveling. My own was in there, stitched to a past I wouldn't let them wear me with. I remembered another saloon, another doorway, and a man with a dealer's smile. I remembered his hands on my wrists. I kept my breath even and counted backward from 50 the way I'd learned to when the room wanted to. Spin. When I stood to leave, the bartender's eye flicked once. Not yes, not no. I took that as a warning. The sun flared out the back door. The path along the alley was a little river of grain dust, soft, treacherous. I walked with the calm of a woman who knows she is watched and refuses to perform fear for it. The granary. Sat at the town's edge, boards old, bruise-colored. A thin wind whistled through its seams, carrying the smell of mice and straw. I waited with my back to the wall, hat brim low, hands open. A minute dragged itself across my skin. Another. I thought about running then. I thought about taking John's sorrel and riding until the ridge was a story someone else told. A footstep scuffed. I didn't look up. I wanted whoever it was to think I was the sort to be surprised. Something pale lay in the dust by my boot. An envelope, hand-lettered. My breath quit me all at once. I bent, slow, and lifted it. Across the front, in a slanted hand, I knew better than my own, was written, Clara. I glanced around the alley. Nothing but the wind and a starling hopping on a fence post like it carried news. I slid a finger under the flap and waited for a shot, for a shout, for the past to finally catch me. None of it came. Only a piece of paper did, thin and frayed, smelling faintly of tallow and lavender, from a house that had burned down in my memory. My mother's handwriting ran across it like she'd never had to stop to breathe. The letter shook in my hands, though the wind had gone still. My mother's script was neat as fence wire, strict where mine slouched. She wrote from a table. I could picture the oilcloth puckered, the lamp blackening the ceiling, begging forgiveness. I hadn't earned and couldn't refuse. Clara, my brave girl, if you live, forgive what I did so you might. I left a trail you can follow. Ask for the woman with the scar at the trading post. If you are gone, then God keep you. If you breathe, find me. I read it twice, then a third time, because the second time I saw the blot near the word forgive, and decided it was a tear. She had always cried like a woman who didn't want witnesses. My mother's grief had been a private thunder. On the day the sheriff's men came to ask about a card sharp with a slit smile and a broken jaw, she'd wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand as if rain had made her wet by accident. I sat on an upturned crate, letter in my lap, and let my heart run into the open like a horse that had kicked free of a stall. Could I be the daughter she mourned, or did the creek hold that girl while I walked around inside her name like a borrowed coat? I pressed the paper to my mouth and breathed in the lavender ghost. I wanted to be angry, wanted to say she should have kept me, should have stayed to the death if need be, but the anger slid off. It is hard to stay furious at a woman who taught you the trick of staying alive. The last line carried me like a current. Find me if you're still alive. I tucked the letter into my bodice and stood, bones stiff but decided. I didn't have horsehair. John's sorrel belonged to his mercy. I chose my feet and the road, and if I had to buy back distance with blisters, I would. The trading post wasn't far, a few miles east where the ridge broke down into a wash, and the wind liked to howl for its supper. I stopped by the house for flour, a strip of jerky, a tin of matches. John looked up from mending a harness and considered. My face as if it were a map. Errand? he asked. Bread, I lied, and then, because he had not yet harmed me, and thread. He nodded and handed me a canteen. Back before dark, he said, which meant he'd chosen to believe me. The trust felt like a borrowed shirt-strange on the shoulders, warmer than I deserved. The road east ran between scrub that snagged my skirt. The sky had the bleached look it gets before dusk admits its coming. Every step pulled strings in my calves and wound my thoughts tighter to the question that had never quit me. Who gets to say what a life is worth after it's been almost taken? I'd been another man's problem once. I had broken him trying to unmake the problem. A creek doesn't care what it keeps. A town does. I didn't know which one I feared more. When the granary had shrunk to a thumb behind me, I turned the letter over to see if the messenger had set a mark or a time. Nothing. Only a faint smear of wax, and a fleck of straw caught in the folder. Clue as thin as a promise. Thin things had saved me before. I followed it anyway. John didn't ask again where I was bound. He just saddled the sorrel, and a small dun-like decisions were fences he didn't mind repairing twice. When I swung up, my skirt fought me. He looked away to let me wrestle my dignity back on east. Road's quiet, he said, which is the sort of thing men say when they want to ride in front without alarming you. I let him. We didn't talk. Hooves stitched the dust, and the ridge fell to the wash. The cottonwoods along the creek were already filling with shadow when we saw it. A campsite pressed into the earth. Cold ash. A bent spoon. A rag of cloth snagged. On sage, I slid down and freed the cloth from the thorn. It was a shawl once, the color of dried plums, edges tattered. The corner still wore my initials, neat little CM stitches my mother made me practice until my finger throbbed. I'd dropped that shawl on a night I'd promised not to remember. A doorway, a shout, my feet flying. Some nights you live by. Dropping pieces that drag. Yours? John asked, turning the cloth with 2 fingers like it might bite. Was, I said. A long while ago. His face worked around a thought. Then you've been this way before. It wasn't a question. I folded the shawl into my saddlebag as if tucking someone in. My father's place used to be farther on. The land quit on him before he quit on it. It felt like a lie to say father. Worse to say nothing. The letter warmed my ribs. I told John about a woman with a scar at the trading post, and that I needed to ask her something only my mother could have written. I kept back the rest, the name I'd burned, and the man I'd fought who chose to stop breathing rather than stop touching. All right, John said at last, like he'd weighed every kind of ruin and chosen the plainest. We rode until the cottonwoods thinned, and the wash broke into dry tongues. The homestead showed itself a fence gnawed to splinters, a windmill arm, hanging like a broke limb, a roof that had lost to weather. Wind-combed rooms where doors once tried to keep it out. I stepped over a fallen shutter and into the kitchen where I'd learned to cut biscuits with a tin cup. The air tasted of mouse and sorrow, I knew. John waited in the yard, polite as a man at a funeral for folks he didn't know. The table was there, scar in the wood where my father slammed a cup the day the bank man came. On the floor beside it, under a slant of moon, something winked. A brass button, stamped with a maker's star from a tailor in White Bend, 2 counties west. One man in particular had worn such buttons the night he cut the deck, to show me how fate worked if you held it hard enough. I pressed the button into my palm until it printed the star, and let memory turn dot. It wasn't enough to know someone had been here. I needed a trail, and trails in the dark are made of patience and pride swallowed. Tomorrow, I said to John. The trading post. If a scarred woman knew where my mother had gone, the road would have to climb over me to stop me. The wind sobbed through the broken panes until the house seemed to breathe. I never liked that sound. It makes you think the building remembers you. I moved careful, letting the floor say where not to step. Dust rose and settled like it had all the time in the world, which maybe it did. Got in the bedroom. The mattress had slumped to a tired grin. The trunk at the foot was half split, lid hanging by one hinge. I knelt, pried it the rest of the way, and found what time can't help making a tangle. A ribbon hardened with grease, a child's shoe, a cracked hair comb, letters too mildewed to read. Under a folded shirt, a flat object slid toward the light. A photograph, the edges foxed and soft dot. My mother looked out from that rectangle like she'd just turned because I called her name. Her hair was pinned hard, mouth set in a line strangers mistook for meanness. In her arms a girl about 8 straight-backed, trying not to blink. Me. The same small mouth that tried to look brave, the same cowlick I'd never whipped into. Good manners. The back of the photograph wore a date in pencil. 10 years ago. I counted on my fingers before my mind stopped staggering. 10 years would put me buried under the story folks told about the girl who disappeared. 10 years would put my mother alone, pressing a tear into a letter and sending it to whatever luck still knew my name. 10 years would mean I'd grown up without permission, and the town had written its own ending for me. You find something? John's voice from the doorway, softer than his boots. I showed him without letting it go. She kept me, I said, and heard how childish that sounded, even in my head. He took the corner of the picture, the way priests lift the cloth, and we stood with it like it was holy. The quiet pressed until I had to say it. They think I'm dead. You're not, he said, simple as a fence post. So we'll show. And a warmth tried to get past my ribs and couldn't. Still, his words set my jaw. I tucked the photograph inside my bodice with the letter, close to the beat that had outlasted a rough world. If there was surviving blood to find kin who knew the truth, or the woman I used to be, then I'd drag that river dry if I had to. My name had been taken from me once. I could take it back, Dot. We left in the blue hour when shapes choose what they want to be. On the porch I paused. The windmill creaked once and went still, as if the place had decided it was done talking. I slipped the brass button into my pocket and felt it click against my thumbnail like a small verdict. White Bend lay west, the trading post squatted east. The creek ran between like a thread we'd have to pull. Tomorrow, I said. The post. I wanted to sleep, but sleep is a coward when your mind is busy making maps. John banked a small fire by the cottonwoods and lay with his hat over his face. I lay with my eyes open to the stars and tried to imagine my mother's hands, where they were, whether they'd forgiven me for living without them. The trading post was a scatter of barrels and a bell that clanged when you didn't touch it. Women traded eggs for needles. Men traded lies for tobacco. I walked in with the photograph in my palm like a coin I was tired of spending. The woman behind the counter had a scar that ran from ear to collar like a scene done by a tired hand. I waited until her customer finished arguing over the price of lamp chimneys, then laid the picture down between us. Her eyes narrowed, then widened, then moved to a shadow in the back, as if that shadow owed her an explanation. "Jed," she said, "come out here and look." He came out like a man who'd been living behind the world. Grizzled, hat crushed, as if he'd wrung it dry once and kept it that way. When he saw the photograph, he trembled, a small quake that started at the mouth. "You're Clara's girl," he said, and the way he said my mother's name wrapped it in years. Then, like a man coughing up a thorn, he added, "She's buried up the ridge. Swore you died." Something slid in my chest and found every place I'd ever bruised. Buried. The word crowded the room. I tried to breathe smaller to make space. I had come ready to argue, ready to barter, ready to throw the photograph like a knife. Grief doesn't honor plans. It just lays down on you. For a moment I was a child, the kind who thinks if she sits very still, the bad thing will forget her. Show me, I said, and my voice came out flat, because it had dropped everything heavy. And tell me why you let her think I was dead. Yet. Gaze skittered to the scarred woman, then to the door. Wasn't me, he said. Was the man who, he bit the word off, looked at my hands, and chose a different road. Killer come through, years back. Asked after a girl with a purple shawl. Your ma sent him to White Bend. Told folks afterward you'd gone. Gone is not dead, I said. Try again. He flinched like I'd roped him. Your ma said? Burying you was the only way to keep you. Said the killer would quit if the talk got thick enough. He rubbed his fingers together as if trying to count something that wouldn't sit still. I told her it was a gamble. She said it was a prayer. We put up a marker and we kept shut. My rage and my sorrow collided like riders in a narrow pass. And you let her stand by a fake grave? He stared at the floorboards. She stood by it like it was holding her up. I wanted to break him or thank him, and both emotions made the same fist. I leaned in close enough to smell the lie on his shirt. You're going to take me there, I said, and you're going to tell me everything you ever told anyone about me, and everything you never did. He nodded, small and miserable. The scarred woman slid a wrapped loaf across the counter and didn't charge me. John, who had been quiet as fence shadow at my shoulder, finally spoke. We ride now, he said, and this time I let him go first because it felt like the only thing that made sense. The cemetery clung to the high side of the ridge where wind could do its work. Markers leaned like tired men. Grass, the mean kind that survives anything, stitched itself between stones with more patience than faith. Jed led us to a corner where the ground sank a little and stopped. Here, he said, and his voice had the cracked sound of an old bucket. The marker was plain. Clara M. Beloved daughter. The date under it matched the back of my photograph. I knelt because my legs had been making that decision without me since we left the post. My palm found the earth cold, even under the sun. You lied, I said, not looking at Jed, because the truth had a shape I was still scared to see. He crouched beside me and set his hat on the ground as if he were entering a church. I did, he said. Your ma ain't here, never was. She left town under dark the next week. Told me to keep the lie breathing, said it was the only thing standing between you and a man who liked to finish things. The wind lifted the edge of my skirt and slapped it against my ankle like it was waking me. He's still hunting? Jed nodded, eyes on the marker, like it might write more if he stared hard enough. He ain't a patient sort, but he's a persistent one. Was hired hand once, turned bitter when he learned bitterness paid. Says you? Stole him a life, his or someone's depending on the bottle, and he's been trying to steal it back ever since. A laugh broke out of me without humor. I stole him nothing. I kept my own. The word own felt new and raw. I thought of my mother packing in the dark, choosing to be dead in a town that had loved and failed her, paying by leaving every small comfort with her name on it. Whatever she had done, it had been for a child who survived into a woman that scared herself. Gratitude and anger don't share a house easy. I let them fight it out and stayed quiet. Where is she? I asked. Last I heard, Jed said, a place called Willow Draw. North, but that was word 2 winters past. He hesitated, then added, She writes through folks, never the same hand twice. I stood and brushed dirt from my skirt. The name on the stone stared back with all the authority a lie can manage. "All right," I said. Then we stopped letting him write our story. I turned, and for the first time since I arrived in Sundown Ridge, I felt the ground under me answer. We rode down slow, Jed behind me, John ahead like a shield. The town spread below with its single street and tidy roomers. I wasn't going to run anymore. If the killer wanted my bones, he could come and find more than he bargained for. I had a letter, a photograph, a button, and a name that refused to stay buried. That's more than some armies of Dot. By the time we reached the water tower, the sun had slanted hard west. I slipped the letter out, held it like a badge, and walked straight for the saloon. Behind me, Yet's hand trembled onto my shoulder, not to stop me this time, but as if to say he'd carry what he could of the weight. I let him. Sundown Ridge held its breath as we came in. I pushed through the saloon doors, and the piano found a reason to stop. The bartender's gaze ticked toward a corner table where a man sat, boots planted wide, hat slung low over a face that had been handsome once. He looked up slow. I knew the makings of him. A proud jaw gone to rust, dime novel eyes. I'd known his kind since I learned flattery's a cousin to threat. "There she is," he said, "the ghost. You stole your mother's life. Should have stayed buried." The room breathed in as if to draft itself into whatever came next. My palms tingled. My heart did not run. I set them on the table. The brass button rang the wood when I dropped it on top. "These are mine," I said, and heard how steady I'd become. "And that grave up the ridge is a lie we told you, so you'd stop dragging your shadow over us." He laughed, but too sharp. "Paper and pictures don't change the creek." "No," I said, "but truth does." I turned the letter so the room could see the slanted script. "My mother wrote this asking me to find her if I breathe. She's alive. She left rather than give you a chance to finish what you started. She has eyes in this town still, and hands willing to sign her name. At the courthouse, if need be." That was a gamble. The bartender straightened. The hired hand's smile faltered. "Courthouse?" he said, as if the word were a language he'd never wanted to learn. "You like talk," I said. "You followed a girl across counties thinking fear would do your chores. I've been afraid. I'm done. I won't kill you. I won't run either. I'm going to live so loudly your version of me can't be heard over it." He reached for the button because greed always does. John's hand fell to his holster. Jed set his hat on the table like a stake. I picked up the button and held it out. "This is yours," I said, "from the night you came to my father's house and learned what no meant. You left with your jacket torn and your jaw slack because a girl fought you. You've been trying to take back that hour ever since." The truth landed. His face changed the way faces do when a man sees himself from the outside. He wasn't outlaw enough to shoot with the town's eyes on him and courthouse hanging like weather. He stood. "This ain't over," he said, "because men like him memorized that line young." "It's over for me," I said. "You don't get to tell it anymore." He pushed past. The saloon exhaled. I gathered the letter and the photograph and slid them back into the place they'd been guarding in my dress. At the door, the bartender cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, "a woman asks after Flower most Tuesdays. Scar on her chin. Next time I'll ask her to leave a word." The piano started up again, something brighter. Outside, the dust looked the same, the light cleaner. I stepped into it with my name intact and my future not yet spoken for. If my mother was out there, I'd find her. If the past came riding, it would find me standing. This is the final part. Thanks for riding with us through another tale from the Old West. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. More adventures are waiting on the trail ahead. See you next time.